So I just want to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and share with you on this evening to talk about issues of equitable development or either environmental justice and planning. We know people like to use different semantics, but the whole point is to have an opportunity to share with you. And my compliments to Kofi Billman for having a course like this. Is this your first year, or how many years have you offered this course?
First one.
This is your first year, so yes, I'm doubly honored. And the reason why I say that is because when I was in graduate school in 1996, we didn't have courses like this. So the fact that a landscape architect feels that this issue is important enough to have students to focus on it for a semester, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes in terms of how much progress has been made, particularly in terms of those fields that target the built environment, whether it be planning, urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, civil engineering. And so when Kofi mentioned this course and asked me to come and participate, I said, of course, I will, because this is what I do. But the fact that this is a course that actually exists is something that's really important to me, because it's part of my story in terms of the things that really have stood out in terms of my own career, in the sense that when I was a student, we didn't have offerings of this nature. And so I hope that as students, and Kofi took the time to explain to me, I guess, the approach towards teaching in terms of this course. There are some lectures done by him, some done by guests. There's some independent study, there's some field work. I encourage you to make the most of this situation. Even today, not enough is being done in order to teach students about the importance of addressing social equity as it relates to the disciplines of the built environment. And so what happens when that occurs is individuals leave the academic setting limited in terms of their proficiency. And the problem perpetuates itself, especially when new graduates go into the workforce, because they often enter into environments where their professional environment is prepared to address these issues as well. And so here you are at North Carolina State, spending an entire semester probing into these issues, asking, at least I hope you're asking some very tough questions and challenging people to give you some good answers. Because you would be amazed how certain issues just stay with you over time. When I was in graduate school, we spent 2 weeks out of 2 years focusing on issues of this nature. And what was, in effect, 2 weeks has become an area of specialization for me. And I've spent the past 10 years working basically in this area, focusing on these issues. And so I don't know where your careers will go, but I'm glad that as you start your careers, particularly through being in this academic setting and having a course like this, I hope that there's something that's shared or something that you learn that at least helps you when you enter the workforce. You'll be able to recall certain examples that perhaps say, there's another way to think about this. And will probably help you in order to elevate certain stories that should be part of a professional dialogue. And I believe that's the most important thing in terms of a course like this, is the fact that the number of guest lecturers and even Kofi as a presenter is taking the time to make sure that we offer a more representative set of successes in terms of cases, as well as experts and champions who are advancing these particular issues in communities around the country. And so that is my hope that in terms of this particular course, that is what it will help to do, is instill in you a clear sense that we can do more than just a status quo. And that these type of approaches aren't aspirational in their orientation. And the reality is that they are pragmatic, and that you can realize better outcomes and the fact that as professionals and as practitioners, we can do well and do good. And so that's the most important thing that we want to get across today. Dr. Boone indicated that he's doing some work, or at least this department is doing some work with North Carolina A&T, because they have a landscape architectural program. Dr. Michelle Eley from North Carolina A&T just stepped in. Yes, we do have the same last name. No, she's not my twin. But she is my younger sister.
Well,
So, I'll share a little bit with you on this topic of equitable development. I'm going to play it by ear. It may take 30 minutes, it may take 40, we'll see. But I just figured that this evening I'd just take a little bit of time just to chat with you and to just give you a good foundation in terms of this issue. And so, I'm going to cover these issues. I'm going to start by offering a little bit of background on the topic of equitable development, just giving you just a little bit of orientation. I will share cases. Although I'm a planner by training, I don't offer presentations like a planner. I annually go to the National Organization of Minority Architects Conference. I'm on the advisory board for the Washington, D.C. chapter of NOAA, so I understand the importance of using good visuals. So you won't see slides with just a lot of words on here. And then after that, what I want to do is really share in terms of some of the interesting work that's happening in terms of how these particular approaches are being applied in order to improve communities, regardless of where they may be domestically, in terms of this work. But the first part of my presentation is going to be a little bit biographical. I know that last week we focused on environmental justice, and I know that Dr. Spurlock was the one who presented and took the time to share with you. But not only do I work in the Office of Environmental Justice, actually in 1994, I had an internship with the Office of Environmental Justice in Seattle, Washington. And so that's very important here. And if I were to take this presentation and try to boil it down to one sentence, I would use a quote from Catherine Prigmore, which is the fact that our experience affects our process and it manifests itself in the aesthetics. And Catherine is a Washington, D.C. based architect. And so I am from North Carolina, as Kofi indicated. I was born in Ahoskie, North Carolina. I grew up in Bertie County, North Carolina. I went to Elizabeth City State University. And at Elizabeth City State, I was a sociology social work major. I also have a degree in urban planning, and of course, I'm a public servant. So the reason why that background is important is because as a sociologist, I understand that one of my responsibilities is to give voice to the unspoken. That is what sociologists do, and specifically social workers, that's what we do. As an urban planner, in terms of our own sense of professional ethics, I realize it's important to speak up for those who may not have a voice in the planning process and encourage the alteration of policies and may not have needs. And then finally, as a civil servant, I realize that public service is the public trust. And so the path that I've been on has helped to shape my professional lens and has affected the way I look at planning and the way that I look at solutions, or either the solutions that I seek out. And in part the reason why I'm here tonight in this classroom is because of my own intellectual curiosity. Because I really felt there was a lot more great work that was probably happening that shows how people who may be underserved and living in communities are perhaps being proactive in guiding the changes that occur within their communities rather than reactive. And unfortunately, that story of how people are being proactive in guiding the change is not being told enough. And so I sought it out, I was actively seeking it out, and I had to teach myself. Because unfortunately the infrastructure didn't exist, and so I had to ultimately teach myself in terms of who was doing good work. And so my story, professionally, somewhat started here. Daniel Spurlock may not have mentioned this particular milestone. Some of you may have seen this photo. It's actually the signing of the Presidential Executive Order on Environmental Justice, Executive Order 12898. It happened in 1994. 1994. But roughly about 3 or 4 months after this executive order was signed, I was on a plane heading from North Carolina to Seattle, Washington, to intern in the Office of Environmental Justice in Seattle, Washington for about 3 months. And it was a very provocative experience. I learned a lot and learned about environmental justice when it was still new, when the dust was still settling, when we were trying to figure out basically how to implement as public policy this idea that really came from the grassroots. And so it was very interesting to, one, be in Seattle, have this internship, have a sociology orientation, and then discover that my skills in sociology, social work could be applied in order to address environmental issues. I did not know that going in. But in the process of being there and learning about the issue, it became obvious that, wow, as a social worker, I don't have to just do clinical work. I can also do work in order to help improve the environment and help people who may be underserved who are dealing with the disproportionate burden of pollution. Social work is often applied on a spectrum. You have micro-level social work, which is clinical, and then you have macro-level social work, which is more oriented around larger systems, including communities. And of course, as an urban planner, I lean towards that macro-scale orientation in terms of social. But the other thing that was interesting about being in Seattle, particularly in 1994, if you look at Seattle compared to other large metropolitan cities in the country, is the fact that Seattle, of course, was one of the more livable cities in the nation, even in 1994. And so here I am, in one sense, I'm focusing on environmental justice, and yet I'm also living in a city that has a certain quality of life that is highly desirable, particularly now, when we look at all the transformations that are occurring within the cities and as we have conversations about placemaking and things of that nature. And so the point is that the location of that internship rubbed off on me. And it wasn't until years later that I understood that the location of where I was doing this particular work was affecting the way in which I looked at environmental justice. And the reason why I want to stress that is because I'm sure, based on Dr. Spurlock's presentation last week, you probably talked a lot about environmental justice in the context of public health, or toxic waste, or pollution, or the law. I don't know if you got into civil rights law and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, or even public involvement. But my orientation around environmental justice has always been connected to planning. Environmental justice is also a planning issue. It's not clear, it's not obvious. Because many communities that may be dealing with an environmental injustice are doing so in part because of either a failure to plan or a failure to enforce proper zoning. So I realize that there are many who will probably present on the topic of environmental justice, and they'll give you a message based on a framing that is around waste management and pollution and public health. But environmental justice is also a planning issue. And this conversation about equitable development is important because all that equitable development is simply a place-based approach for encouraging environmental justice. That's what it is. Often when we talk about place-based approaches, we think of new urbanism, we think of a project for public spaces. We think of efforts in order to improve the resiliency of a community. We think of efforts in order to improve open space and issues of that nature. But environmental justice has its own place-based focus as well. That's equitable development. That's all that it is. So, after that internship, I went to graduate school at the University of Iowa. Dr. Eley was at the University of Illinois, so she was 4 hours away. And so we were both out in the Midwest for 2 years. She stayed on and went ahead and got her doctorate at the University of Illinois. After 2 years in Iowa, I had enough of Iowa. And I eventually ended up working in Kansas City. So I had 4 years of Midwest culture. But when I was in graduate school, I was a bit of an outlier. The University of Iowa, their urban planning program was more policy-oriented, so it didn't have that real design orientation that you may find with some planning at the University of Iowa, is that its main sectoral majors at that time were transportation planning and economic development. And my area of specialization was environmental planning. And so in 1996, to say that you were an environmental planner in terms of your specialization, you really weren't that popular. And not that anyone meant you any ill will, it's just the fact that obviously in certain academic programs, you have programs that you put a lot of money in and invest in and focus in, and then you have those other ones that are like, you're doing that issue. So, and in the 1990s, unlike now, I mean, there are those who had this strong position and belief that focusing on the environment is costly. It directs or shifts the focus of resources that otherwise could be spent on, I don't know, building highways or focusing on other ambitious schemes, but people didn't have the same, didn't put the same level of primacy on the environment as they do now. Obviously, the conversation was around sustainability. That level of attention wasn't always the focus in the mid-1990s. Even though Al Gore wrote the book, Earth in the Balance, which was about sustainable development. But the point is that I was an outlier because I was an environmental planner by specialization, but I was also an outlier because I had this strong interest in environmental justice. And I'm sharing this anecdote because one of the things that graduate school did for me, if anything, it prepared me in the process of being in an environment such as that where ideas or perspectives that you have may not be viewed as being popular. And so it prepared me for entering a workforce where sometimes you have to deal with skeptics and you have to deal with cynics because one's perspective or one's value system may be different than those of their peers. And so we all have to be mindful of that depending on where we may go in terms of our pathways. The other thing that's worth noting about that graduate school experience is the fact that I learned over time that Alan Altshore, he's a professor at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. I learned that he was right when he said that no planner will consider his education complete who has not dealt with the dilemmas that go in Crumholt's space. Alan Altshore wrote that in a book that was entitled Making Equity Planning Work. And Norman Crumholtz was a planner for the city of Cleveland in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so the point is to acknowledge the fact that one's education will extend beyond the type of things that one learns in a book. And there's a lot that you're going to learn through experiential learning. And so my education as a planner didn't end in 1998 when I got my master's degree, because I was still intellectually curious. Because there are some things that I didn't get answers to, at least not satisfactory answers to when I was in graduate school, particularly in terms of how do you address issues with equity, or what does the outcome look like when you properly address environmental justice during the planning process. I didn't get sufficient answers to that. And so I had to figure those things out on my own. And so I'm just sharing this to acknowledge the fact that clearly we're at a point where we are constantly trying to figure out how to move beyond just the status quo. Even now, it's 2015, it's been almost 40 years since the Brundtland Report was released. How many of you have heard of the Brundtland Report? The Brundtland Report is a report on sustainable development. It was written in 1987. It was entitled Our Common Future. And so the point is to acknowledge that even though there was a sustainable development report that was written in 1987 that provided a basic framework of a triple bottom line of advancing goals that are good for the environment, the economy, and also good for achieving certain social outcomes, we realize that often we've done probably a better job in terms of addressing the environment and the economy. And then often the outcomes in terms of addressing social issues often leaves a lot to be desired. We still see that same problem playing itself out today, almost to the degree that we sometimes think, even as planners, that addressing issues in terms of the social realm are beyond our purview. That has been a real problem in terms of the planning profession. It's become an even more severe problem in more recent years as we've had other place-based initiatives that have become pretty popular and fashionable in the sense that practitioners often want to focus on how do we improve the physical infrastructure that makes up the community, and then you try to divorce that from the realities that you have people from all walks of life who may not be as affluent or may not be able to afford some of the physical redevelopment or reinvestment or changes that will actually occur. They're not as resilient economically. And so the point is that we have to look at these issues as systems. We can't just compartmentalize them. We're tempted to do that, but the reality is that we need to think a little bit more critically about those unintended impacts that may occur from actions that we feel are well-meaning. And so that's the reason why I'm sharing this particular slide, particularly in the sense that there are commonalities here, in the sense that at one particular time, issues of climate change and issues of environmental justice both were viewed as being unpopular. And they both were viewed as being politically inexpedient. Obviously, concerns about issues of climate change have started to increase in terms of the level of public attention. But we have to be mindful that these issues aren't just two distinct issues. They are related to one another. Of course, even the Pope has made that particular point in the sense that we're not dealing with two separate issues. We're dealing with one very complex issue, and we need to develop a mastery of both. And so even right now, the pontiff is still in Washington, D.C., and so I thank Kofi Boom because I was able to get out of D.C. today and I had to deal with a lot of transportation issues.
Did you say your Hail Marys? Are you good?
I'm good. And so the point is the fact that even the pontiff has acknowledged the fact that our issues are connected. Even the pontiff has found it necessary to remind people that this is not a green encyclical. It is a social encyclical. And even at this point, some people have forgotten that it's also an encyclical on environmental justice. A lot of the media is focusing on the climate change aspects, but there's a lot that is within the statement that is relevant towards how do we make sure that we encourage that balance, that sense of productive harmony that has to occur, because we're all responsible to one another. And so I just wanted to share that just in order to lay the foundation in terms of my remarks. That many professionals, and I include you as professionals, are aware of concepts like environmental justice. But the challenge until recently has really been framing how to implement it during the planning process, visualizing the product from that process, as well as correcting the misperception that addressing environmental justice may slow down development. However, there are approaches that are showing that you really can do both, and you can do so effectively. And equitable development is one of the strategies that communities are looking to in order to more effectively make sure that we respond to the needs of citizens who are vulnerable, while also making sure that we are effective and making sure that we improve quality of life for everyone. And so this is the definition for equitable development that I often use when I lecture. I've published some articles. This is the particular definition that I use in the sense that equitable development is an approach for meeting the needs of underserved communities through policies and practices that reduce disparities while fostering places that are healthy and vibrant. So I'm putting that definition out there in order to ground the conversation. I think it's important to have a very clear definition. I know that we live in an era where we like to use clever marketing and we like to be trendy in terms of how we pitch ideas, but I'm a little old-fashioned, and so I like it when my definitions are a little precise. And so my apologies if that definition is a little too academic, but if you want to frame it in a different way, it's simply a place-based approach for encouraging environmental justice. That's all of that. And so just to give you a little bit of orientation, even the International City County Management Association has spoken to the fact that we have to do a better job in terms of responding to the needs of underserved populations. ICMA, they often publish documents called the Green Book. It's called the Planner's Bible. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You've probably seen it at UNC Chapel Hill. But the point is the fact that ICMA, as an organization, has often emphasized that planning at its best takes into account the social implications of land use and economic development decisions. So what that means is that, in very pragmatic terms, is we're a nation of 319 million people. We have citizens from all walks of life, and if we don't think critically about how to meet the needs of underserved populations properly, then we may fall short in ensuring that everyone has a safe and healthy environment in which to live and work. That's what it means in pragmatic terms. I also want to note that the views of ICMA have been noted by others, such as, for example, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. In 1996, they issued a report entitled Environmental Justice, Urban Revitalization of Brownfields. The reason why this report is important is because leaders in the environmental justice movement, although many may not be aware of this, framed their own perspective on issues targeting urban planning and targeting place-based issues. And so the reason why this report is important is because many environmental justice proponents understood the value added of redeveloping within existing communities. They also understood that given the fact that lower income people may not be as resilient to shifts or changes in terms of the physical environment, that there may be some unintended impacts if you don't think critically about how to address those up front. And so basically what this report emphasizes is the fact that the better outcomes can be realized if you think a little bit more critically about how to make communities more inclusive at the start of the process rather than trying to correct for it after the fact. And so I think it's important for you to know that this particular report was done, particularly after Daniel Spurlock offered remarks on the topic of environmental justice last week. This is one of two reports that the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council prepared. The second one was published in 2006 on the impacts from brownfields redevelopment within existing communities. And so you can easily get both reports. They're online. And they affirm that environmental justice proponents have always had their own way of thinking about how do you more effectively address unintended impacts during the planning process. I'm sharing this timeline only to give you a clear sense of the fact that the recurring theme in planning practice over the span of the past 50 years has been how do you deal with the social implications of land use and economic development decisions. And of course, the approach that's gained traction in recent years is equitable development. And Policy Link, I don't know if many of you have heard of Policy Link, they're based in Oakland, California, has been the main component of this approach. And so the point is that this isn't a new conversation. This is a conversation that's been going on for quite a while. And so it's only been until recently that we've been able to communicate and articulate and share solutions in a manner that's really going to be more pragmatic and resonate with individuals. For example, when Paul Davidoff was focusing on advocacy planning, when Norman Crumbles were focusing on equity planning, we didn't have the benefits of the internet. And we didn't have the benefits of social media and other particular innovations that allow us to share information a little bit more easily. And so now we live in a society where we have the ability to share information and really share the more compelling successes so that people understand that this work can be done and it can be brought to scale. So, it's just a little Venn diagram that I'm sharing just simply to acknowledge the fact that the goals of urban redevelopment and meeting the needs of underserved communities aren't mutually exclusive. The reality is that we can address both. And when you do, the outcome is equitable development. So this space, this area of overlap is going to be the focus of what our conversation is about. I don't know how many of you have read the book Getting to Yes. It's a book that's on negotiation. It's a book that's on alternative dispute resolution. The point is that one of the key themes within that book is the importance of expanding the size of the pie And so with equitable development, the focus is on how do you expand the size of the pie rather than split the pie into more pieces. And as you, as students, go out and you start to do some of your field work over the span of the semester, I think one of the questions that you're going to have is, how do we focus on ways in order to expand the size of the pie? How do we be creative? How do we come up with more innovative solutions that really result in solutions that will be of greater benefit, not just to the immediate populations that we're concerned about, but are solutions that also others who may not be affected also have appreciation for as well. And so it's really about how do we expand the size of the pie, and how do we do encourage solutions that are both and rather than either or. So I want to spend a little bit of time here. How many of you have heard of talking to you guys? Joining from North Carolina right now.
That's the
how many of you have heard of New Urbanism? Okay. How many of you have heard of smart growth? Okay, good. And I'm sure you're all familiar with these principles on the left side of the screen. Okay? And these are principles that the Smart Growth Network came up with around 1996. These are principles that reflect the characteristics of healthy, vibrant, and successful communities. And the reason why I'm sharing this slide, again, I've already given you a background on myself in terms of my own views, my own lens, the values that really have helped to inform my perspectives as a professional. I worked in the EPA Smart Growth Program from 2000 to 2008. And one of my concerns while working in the program was it wasn't clear to me why we were always focusing so much on the physical attributes of communities while not paying particular attention to certain social factors as well. And often a lot of our reports and the solutions that were being shared, the education that we were doing, was oriented in a manner whereby we didn't effectively think as critically about how persons who were living in these existing cities, these urban centers, were being more active in guiding the changes that would occur within those places. And so eventually I reached a point where I realized that we had to shift or change the way in which we looked at things. I kind of felt it, I had difficulty focusing only on a set of principles that focused on the physical environment and yet divorcing ourselves from a broader set of issues that are commingled with that. Again, I don't disaggregate. And so if we're going to focus on ways in order to improve our communities by focusing on a mix of land uses and making communities more compact and thinking about how to make places more walkable and bikeable, we also need to be sensitive to the fact that many of these communities that we want to improve have a certain set of social challenges that led to those communities being undesirable initially. And we have to be responsive to those particular challenges, even though they may not be as popular or sexy for us to deal with. The reality is that they are commingled. And if we don't deal with them, those problems aren't going to go away. They aren't going to disappear. They're going to manifest themselves in other ways. And so eventually, I started researching and thinking a little bit more critically about what are the things that people are actually doing when they are playing a more effective role in leading the change within their communities, particularly within communities that are underserved. And really, that's the abbreviated story of how these principles for equitable development. It was a way in order to articulate what are the things that communities are doing, whether it's faith-based work, or whether it's work in order to preserve historic assets, heritage assets, the type of work that really shows when persons, regardless of their ethnicity, are really playing a role in order to be more responsible and to be as effective in terms of making their communities better places to be by focusing on a more holistic approach, a more community-driven approach that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to engage local government, but making sure that they have ownership in the process. And that's really how these principles for equitable development are prepared. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how some of these principles are being addressed through some clear case examples. And then I'm going to eventually go into some real cases that are emblematic of what equitable development actually is. By talking about this gentleman. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Floyd Flake. Floyd Flake is a former U.S. Congressman. He's the pastor of the Greater Allen Cathedral in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And one of the things that's important to note about him is the fact that he's a real urban thought leader. He is a very effective community builder. And as a leader, one of the things that he has been very effective at is leveraging and being effective in terms of pulling in the resources in order to address particular gaps in terms of vacancy and abandonment within its neighborhood, in terms of the dirt, in terms of services, reversing problems in terms of severe unemployment, making sure that one understands that the role of the church is to provide more than just a Sunday morning experience, but understanding that the role of the church also is to encourage ministry to the neighborhood in which one is actually located. And the important thing to note about the work of Reverend Flake is the fact that when he started doing his work in the 1970s, there was no area-wide groundworks program. There was no promise zone program that was in place. There was no fix-it-first policy that we now often try to use in order to leverage and encourage redevelopment within existing communities. So the point is the fact that much of the infrastructure, much of the fiscal infrastructure, the policies that have really helped to accelerate the pace of redevelopment within existing communities, those didn't exist when he started his work in the 1970s. A lot of that is in place, has been put in place now over the span of the past 15 years, but he was able to do it. Why? Because he saw it was a responsibility of the church to step in and fill voids that were left unattended by the public and the private sector. And so the other thing that's worth noting about his work, if you were to go visit today, and I want to be sensitive in terms of how to say this, is the work that has been built in Jamaica, Queens, New York, the most aesthetically pleasing work? No. But have they done a very effective job in terms of directing growth back towards existing communities, returning idle property and putting it back on the tax base, helping in order to make sure they encourage a more sustainable pattern of development by directing growth towards an existing community? Yes. And so we often talk about issues of how to make our communities more sustainable. He was doing it in the 1970s before it became popular. And so if you were to go to Jamaica, Queens, New York today, in terms of the legacy of his work, it at this point represents about $600 million in community reinvestment. He did that. Another example that you can look at is the work of the City Project in Los Angeles, California. Some of you may be more familiar with this particular work. Robert Garcia is an attorney. He's a civil rights attorney. And he has a real emphasis in terms of addressing the problems or challenges in terms of inequity as it relates to access to parks and open space. And so, as with many social disparities that you see in communities around the country, many lower income communities may have an inadequate amount of access to parks and open space. More affluent communities have sufficient access to such assets or natural resources. That's the same trend that's being played out in Los Angeles, California. Robert Garcia, as a civil rights attorney, is often focused on the notion of green justice or an environmental justice focus that focuses on access to parks and open space. And one of the things that's important about Robert Garcia is the fact that he's been able to influence the investment of over $20 billion by working at the intersection of social justice and sustainable regional planning. The other thing that's worth noting about Robert Garcia is the fact that he understands quite effectively that understanding social diversity and responding to social change are keys to effective physical planning. Another example that I could reference actually comes from the state of South Carolina. When people talk about the Low Country, they sometimes think of Charleston, but the Low Country often brings to images in terms of the Gullah Geechee populations that have resided in the coastal areas of southern North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida. And they have been in those areas for roughly about 400 years. So obviously over that span of time, they've had the ability to have some rather distinct attributes in terms of their own culture and heritage that have developed. Some of you may be familiar with their artwork in terms of basket weaving and other things of that nature. But the reason why I'm sharing this particular case example is because the Low Country, like most coastal areas in our country, are obviously being affected by certain patterns of development and growth. And some of those patterns aren't the most efficient. It's just simply a perpetuation of sprawling patterns of development. Highway 17, which runs through the Low Country, is an example of that. The widening of Highway 17 in order to facilitate better mobility for automobile traffic. But obviously, that is just simply a symptom of a much larger problem in the sense of the inefficiencies of how certain land use patterns will actually affect the physical environment itself. It may actually affect some of the cultural assets that are of value to those who see themselves as being part of the Gullah Geechee communities. So, for example, you can't have sweetgrass baskets unless you have sweetgrass. And a lot of that natural habitat where that grass actually grows is often threatened because of the patterns of development that have been occurring within the southeast, within the coastal areas, particularly in South Carolina. And so the reason why I'm sharing this example is the fact that Congress actually approved legislation that eventually led to the development of a cultural management corridor, with also the creation of a commission in order to manage the development of a cultural management plan, in order to help address and figure out how they could actually, one, address some of the natural issues that are important towards the sense of place within that section of the state, but also make sure that they don't compromise certain cultural and heritage assets that are relevant towards that population. And so they have a commission that in effect is playing a very important role, not to usurp the local planning process in some of the communities that are within the Gullah Geechee cultural heritage corridor, but instead to make sure that they think a lot more critically about how they can help or enable jurisdictions, local governments, to think a little bit more innovatively about how do they address certain social and cultural impacts that they otherwise wouldn't think about. And so there is a management plan that has been released. It is final. This image says draft. There is actually now a final management plan that has been put in place, again, to focus on making sure that in those coastal regions that are along this particular corridor are more mindful of how we can be more innovative and encourage solutions that move beyond the status quo. And so that's the reason why I'm sharing that particular example. So, I know I'm going on a little bit, and one of the things I do want to stress is I don't want to think that everyone is having an aha moment right now, or that you're having an epiphany or a moment of clarity on this topic of equitable development. I realize that there may be certain questions that you may have in terms of why one should encourage equitable development as an approach as opposed to how we manage us within our nation. And so one of the things they felt would help them in order to be more effective in getting ahead of those trends was to make sure that through their comprehensive planning process that they included provisions that were designed to address social equity and environmental justice. And so they made an update to their comprehensive plan in 2008 in order to do that. And so the reason why I'm sharing this example is because there are some who would suggest, well, we don't know how to address or incorporate environmental justice into our plan. Well, King County did it. And so it can be done if we think we'll critically and creatively in terms of how to make sure that occurs. So the point that I want to emphasize, as I said earlier, we can either pay now or we can pay later. We can either invest in work that leads to award-winning outcomes, or we can not make the investments and eventually have to deal with problems where you see communities that are not only distressed, but where they also start to exhibit some signs of civil unrest. And of course, we are all familiar with the stories and the narratives that have taken place in places like Baltimore, and places like Ferguson. I just want to note that in August of last year, on August 26th, I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And the reason why I was there is because they were having a celebration of 16 years of progress in terms of the Regenesis Project. U.S. Congressman Clyburn was there to observe a lot of the work and to really applaud the community building efforts of the partners who helped in order to make that particular project work. That was on August 26, 2014. That was 16 days after the social unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. The social unrest in Ferguson, Missouri ended on August 25 of last year. And so the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because many of the persons who were participating in some of the programming and offering remarks on that day during that visit noted some of the clear distinctions between where Spartanburg was as a community and where Ferguson presently was, given the social unrest that had occurred there. And many of them understood that the reason why Spartanburg was able to avoid the type of outcomes that had happened in Ferguson is because they spent 16 years making investments, as opposed to spending 16 years not responding to the needs of the citizens who are underserved and vulnerable. And so we have to think a little bit critically about how we make investments and challenging systems when they often suggest that this type of work isn't politically expedient, this work that's not going to yield an immediate return. I would rather make my investments towards projects that are going to yield a return over time than to focus on how do we triage a situation after it gets out of control. I don't think that's the best investment of our tax dollars. I think the better investment is to make sure that we spend time gradually fixing problems. And certainly the purpose of this presentation is to show that we can gradually fix things over time rather than just simply render those problems invisible. So what does this have to do with public policy? I've worked on sustainable urban policy at the US EPA. As I indicated earlier, I worked on sustainable urban policy over the span of about 8 years. And so one of the things I just want to acknowledge is the fact that one of the things I had to learn how to do over that span of 8 years is I had to learn how to whitewash the fence. Some of you may be familiar with Tom Sawyer and that analogy of whitewashing the fence. And so the point is, as I had to learn how to make these issues to appear to be as fun and fascinating as the prevailing approaches for encouraging sustainable communities. And so what I mean by that is the fact that you would be amazed just how quickly a program will warm up to an idea like equitable development. Once you establish a track record for lecturing and writing, and doing technical assistance work, and making it a requirement of the grants and the cooperative agreements that you manage, and by building relationships with allied professionals. And when you work in the public policy sector, you're dealing with bureaucracies. And so sometimes you can't change the bureaucracy, but you can change the way that you manage the projects which fall under your portfolio. And that's really what I did, is I focused on, well, if I can't change my office, I'm going to change how I manage the work that I'm responsible for. And if my office isn't going to establish its own track record, I'm going to make sure I have my own. And so over time, what we found, even within agencies like EPA, we have become a little bit more pliable and amenable towards issues of equitable development. And whereas these are issues that we haven't always talked about, you will find equitable development now referenced in certain documents, whether it be reports or certain policy papers that we have internally. And so as an agency, we have grown into these shoes. But it wouldn't have happened unless we we started to make some very critical decisions about how do we address issues that we often would say are beyond our purview. And I was of the opinion that, no, it is absolutely within our purview. And although others may want to ignore it, I can't, because I believe that public service is a public trust. So, before I conclude, I just want to emphasize a couple of points. First is the fact that award-winning outcomes for equitable development are not the result of serendipity. It's not a lucky accident. It's the result of clearly set expectations, collaborative problem solving, and persistent leadership. Second, I just want to stress that if we're going to encourage more healthy, more livable communities, we're going to have to penetrate new audiences. We have to understand that there's a lot of untapped talent that we need to leverage in order to make our communities better. There's no reason that we should only be working with the American Planning Association or the National Trust for Historic Preservation or the Urban Land Institute, when the reality is that we have a lot of untapped talent, and talent whose membership probably has a lot of understanding in terms of how to approach issues that we've often treated as peripheral. And then the final point that I just want to acknowledge is really the fact that in terms of this work on equitable development, is the fact that environmental justice is an issue that has permanence. It is an issue that's here to stay. Unfortunately, our failure to address these issues has resulted in the problem being passed on to another generation. And so the reason why Kofi has a class like this is because we want to make sure that you're prepared to address these issues more effectively as professionals and as practitioners. And I hope that in the span of the past 40, 50 minutes that I've been able to share something that will help you to realize that, no, we can actually address these issues. And we don't have to throw our hands up in the air and say, I don't know what to do. But if you are interested in learning more about this issue, I just want to make sure that you're aware of the following resources. As I indicated earlier, PolicyLink is one of the nation's leading proponents on equitable development. They have all types of resources on their website. I also want to acknowledge that the EPA has a collaborative problem-solving model. The Regenesis project that I introduced earlier, the model tells the story of how the Regenesis project was carried out based on a key framework that the agency developed because they felt it was important to synthesize their lessons, not just from working in Spartanburg, South Carolina, but also articulating and conveying the fact that the agency had a track record of doing place-based work that was oriented around addressing issues of environmental justice. Also, I should note that on EPA's Spartanburg program actually launched a new section on their website that focused on the connections between smart growth and equitable development. They did that last year, so if you're interested in a more complete inventory of resources, you can find that there. And then also, I just want to stress the importance of attending conferences. Kofi indicated, of course, he's going to be in New Orleans for the National Organization of Minority Architects Conference. Part of this class is about self-education, learning, teaching yourselves. I have found that as a planner, I learn a lot by hanging around architects. They help me to think a little bit more critically about how I approach issues, how I present issues, how I can think more visually. And so I find that this approach to lifelong learning is going to be so very important, particularly as we approach these pretty dynamic and interesting issues that we encounter as we pursue our endeavors as practitioners. And so I'm just going to conclude again with this triple bottom line paradigm by acknowledging again it's about pushing. I'm not in the business as an individual of advancing sustainability. I'm in the business of giving sustainability a necessary push. And so today my goal really was to help share and to stress that the approaches for advancing goals of equitable development are not aspirational. They are very pragmatic. The means for advancing and making our communities more sustainable are not restrictive. They are actually expansive, and they include concepts like environmental justice. And so I hope that today I was able to share with you and impart with you some of the clear examples, some of the clear success stories that show how communities are actually doing work that helps to make sure that we encourage more fairer, more balanced outcomes that will actually help to move us towards community parity. And so I want to thank you all for your attention. I want to thank Kofi for inviting me to participate. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them if we have time. I don't know how much time we have left in terms of the Q&A, or you have to shift towards any other issues in terms of...
We have time. We have time.
So are there any questions? So I just want to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and share with you on this evening to talk about issues of equitable development, or either environmental justice and planning. We know people like to use different semantics, but the whole point is to have an opportunity to share with you. And my compliments to Kofi Boone for having a course like this. Is this your first year, or how many years have you offered this course?
First one.
This is your first year, so yes, I'm doubly honored. And the reason why I say that is because when I was in graduate school in 1996, we didn't have courses like this. So the fact that a landscape architect feels that this issue is important enough to have students to focus on it for a semester, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes in terms of how much progress has been made, particularly in terms of those fields that target the built environment, whether it be planning, urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, civil engineering. And so when Kofi mentioned this course and asked me to come and participate, I said, of course, I will, because this is what I do. But the fact that this is a course that actually exists is something that's really important to me, because it's part of my story in terms of the things that really have stood out in terms of my own career, in the sense that when I was a student, we didn't have offerings of this nature. And so I hope that as students, and Kofi took the time to explain to me, I guess, the approach towards the teaching in terms of this course. There are some lectures done by him, some done by guests. There's some independent study, there's some field work. I encourage you to make the most of this situation. Even today, not enough is being done in order to teach students about the importance of addressing social equity as it relates to the disciplines of the built environment. And so what happens when that occurs is individuals leave the academic setting limited in terms of their proficiency. And the problem perpetuates itself, especially when new graduates go into the workforce, because they often enter into environments where their professional environment is prepared to address these issues as well. And so here you are at North Carolina State, spending an entire semester probing into these issues, asking, at least I hope you're asking, some very tough questions and challenging people to give you some good answers. Because you would be amazed how certain issues just stay with you over time. When I was in graduate school, we spent 2 weeks out of 2 years focusing on issues of this nature. And what was, in effect, 2 weeks has become an area of specialization for me. And I've spent the past 10 years working basically in this area, focusing on these issues. And so I don't know where your careers will go, but I'm glad that as you start your careers, particularly through being in this academic setting and having a course like this, I hope that there's something that's shared or something that you learn that at least helps you when you enter the workforce. You'll be able to recall certain examples that perhaps say, there's another way to think about this. And will probably help you in order to elevate certain stories that should be part of the professional dialogue. And I believe that's the most important thing in terms of a course like this, is the fact that the number of guest lecturers and even Kofi as a presenter is taking the time to make sure that we offer a more representative set of successes in terms of cases, as well as experts and champions who are advancing these particular issues in communities around the country. And so that is my hope that in terms of this particular course, that is what it will help to do, is instill in you a clear sense that we can do more than just a status quo. And that these type of approaches aren't aspirational in their orientation. And the reality is that they are pragmatic, and that you can realize better outcomes. And the fact that as professionals and as practitioners, we can do well and do good. And so that's the most important thing that we want to get across today. Dr. Boone indicated that he's doing some work, or at least this department is doing some work with North Carolina A&T, because they have a landscape architectural program. Dr. Michelle Eley from North Carolina A&T just stepped in. Yes, we do have the same last name. No, she's not my twin, but she is my younger sister.
Welcome.
So I just want to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and share with you on this evening to talk about issues of equitable development, or either environmental justice and planning. We know people like to use different semantics, but the whole point is to have an opportunity to share with you. And my compliments to Kofi Boone for having a course like this. Is this your first year, or how many years have you offered this course?
First one.
This is your first year, so yes, I'm doubly honored. And the reason why I say that is because when I was in graduate school in 1996, we didn't have courses like this. So the fact that a landscape architect feels that this issue is important enough to have students to focus on it for a semester, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes in terms of how much progress has been made, particularly in terms of those fields that target the built environment, whether it be planning, urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, civil engineering. And so when Kofi mentioned this course and asked me to come and participate, I said, of course, I will, because this is what I do. But the fact that this is a course that actually exists is something that's really important to me, because it's part of my story in terms of the things that really have stood out in terms of my own career, in the sense that when I was a student, we didn't have offerings of this nature. And so I hope that as students, and Kofi took the time to explain to me, I guess, the approach towards teaching in terms of this course. There are some lectures done by him, some done by guests. There's some independent study, there's some field work. I encourage you to make the most of this situation. Even today, not enough is being done in order to teach students about the importance of addressing social equity as it relates to the disciplines of the built environment. And so what happens when that occurs is individuals leave the academic setting limited in terms of their proficiency. And the problem perpetuates itself, especially when new graduates go into the workforce, because they often enter into environments where their professional environment is prepared to address these issues as well. And so here you are at North Carolina State, spending an entire semester probing into these issues, asking these, I hope you're asking some very tough questions and challenging people to give you some good answers. Because you would be amazed how certain issues just stay with you over time. When I was in graduate school, we spent 2 weeks out of 2 years focusing on issues of this nature. And what was, in effect, 2 weeks has become an area of specialization for me. And I've spent the past 10 years working basically in this area, focusing on these issues. And so I don't know where your careers will go, but I'm glad that as you start your careers, particularly through being in this academic setting and having a course like this, I hope that there's something that's shared or something that you learn that at least helps you When you enter the workforce, you'll be able to recall certain examples that perhaps say, there's another way to think about this. And will probably help you in order to elevate certain stories that should be part of the professional dialogue. And I believe that's the most important thing in terms of a course like this, is the fact that the number of guest lecturers and even Kofi as a presenter is taking the time to make sure that we offer a more representative set of successes in terms of cases, as well as experts and champions who are advancing these particular issues in communities around the country. And so that is my hope that in terms of this particular course, that is what it will help to do, is instill in you a clear sense that we can do more than just a status quo. And that these type of approaches aren't aspirational in their orientation. And the reality is that they are pragmatic, and that you can realize better outcomes. And the fact that as professionals and as practitioners, we can do well and do good. And so that's the most important thing that we want to get across today. Dr. Boone indicated that he's doing some work, or at least this department is doing some work with North Carolina A&T, because they have a landscape architectural program. Dr. Michelle Eley from North Carolina A&T just stepped in. Yes, we do have the same last name. No, she's not my twin, but she is my younger sister.
Well,
So,